I am a woman working at a small company with a relatively flexible schedule. Despite this flexibility, I often have to handle some extra tasks after my regular working hours, so I usually get home around 10 p.m. There is a 24-hour convenience store near my home. Although it's small, it is very convenient. I often go there to buy some snacks and daily essentials because it's just 2 blocks away from my apartment. One night, as usual, I decided to stop by the convenience store after work to buy some milk and bread. The store's location is a bit secluded, and although there are a few small shops nearby, most of them are closed at that hour. The convenience store is typically quiet, with only one clerk working. I wasn't very familiar with the clerk, but he would greet me kindly every time I visited. That night, when I walked into the convenience store, it was just me and the clerk inside. The atmosphere was very quiet. I headed straight to the food section and grabbed what I needed. As I was about to check out, I noticed a middle-aged man enter the store. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing a dark coat, and his hair was a bit disheveled. After entering the store, he didn't immediately pick up anything, but instead started wandering around, as if checking something. I stood at the counter, ready to pay, but I felt a chill down my spine. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man standing by a shelf not too far away from me, with his eyes fixed on me. His stare made me feel uneasy, but I told myself not to overthink it. After all, this is a 24-hour convenience store, and it's not unusual for people to come and go. I quickly paid for my items and prepared to leave. Just as I picked up my bag and was about to walk out, the man suddenly approached the counter and started speaking to the clerk in a low, hurried voice. I didn't listen closely and hurried out of the store. As I exited, I couldn't help but quicken my pace. When I reached the parking lot, I heard the store's doorbell chime as someone came out. My instincts told me something was wrong. I took a detour, walking in the opposite direction, and discreetly used my phone screen to check behind me. Sure enough, the man had also exited the store and was looking around, as if searching for something. He slowly walked in the direction where I had been standing earlier, which made me even more nervous. I decided to take a different route to reach the main road, where the lighting was better, and there were usually some passers-by. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. When I got to the main road, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me getting closer. I turned around and saw the man speeding up toward me, his expression becoming more anxious and agitated. Realizing the danger, I quickly decided not to go home and headed straight to a coffee shop on the other side of the main road. The coffee shop stays open late, with students and night shift workers often studying and relaxing there. I pushed open the door and walked in, quickly finding a seat by the window. I acted as if I were relaxed, pulling out my phone to pretend I was scrolling through social media. Through the window, I saw the man standing outside the convenience store, looking around. He seemed a bit hesitant, and eventually, he turned and walked away. Even though he was gone, I stayed at the coffee shop for a long time, only heading home when I felt it was safe. That night's experience taught me that even familiar places near home could harbour potential dangers. Since then, I have avoided visiting the convenience store alone late at night and chosen safer times and places to shop. Although that man never appeared again, the incident left a lingering sense of unease. I am a college student living in an apartment near my school. Due to a busy study schedule, I often stay up late doing assignments, and sometimes I need to grab some snacks or drinks to stay awake. There is a 24-hour convenience store not far from my apartment. Although it's small, it's well stocked, and I often go there in the middle of the night to buy some snacks and drinks. One night, at around 1 a.m., I was struggling to keep studying and feeling quite drowsy, so I decided to take a walk to the convenience store and buy an energy drink to wake myself up. I grabbed my wallet and phone, put on my headphones, and walked alone to the store. At this hour, the streets were nearly empty, with only faint streetlights and the occasional passing vehicle. As I reached the entrance of the convenience store, I pulled open the glass door, and the door chime jingled softly. The store was as quiet as usual. The night shift clerk was a middle-aged man, not very tall, and wearing a pair of reading glasses. He often read newspapers during his shift, occasionally nodding off, but every time I came in, he would look up and acknowledge me before continuing his tasks. We rarely exchanged words. This time, when I walked into the store, the clock gave me a slight nod. I headed straight to the drink section, grabbed an energy drink, and then made my way to the counter. Just then, I noticed a tall, thin man standing at the far end of the aisle, wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled low, obscuring his face. He wasn't picking out any items, but just stood there, motionless, staring at me. I felt uncomfortable. My heart started to race, but I tried not to show it and walked directly to the counter. As I placed the drink on the counter, I couldn't help but glance back. The man was still there, standing in the same spot, his face hidden in the shadow of his hood. "It's late. Be careful heading home," the clock suddenly said as he rang up my purchase, which startled me a bit. He continued to check out my items while casting a wary glance toward the man behind me. I nodded slightly, feeling a sense of unease. After paying, I took my drink and walked out of the store. Once outside, I took a deep breath, but I still felt like the man's eyes were on my back. I quickened my pace, eager to get back to my apartment. Halfway there, I heard footsteps behind me. My heart sank. I was certain those footsteps were intentionally following me. Nervously, I took out my phone and pretended to make a call, while my ears focused on the sounds behind me. The footsteps drew closer, and I felt a chill run down my spine. At that moment, I heard a voice shout from the direction of the convenience store, "Hey, stop right there!" I turned to look, and the man in the black hoodie had stopped, turning back toward the store. I also glanced over and saw the night shift clerk standing at the entrance, holding a large flashlight, its beam directly pointed at the man. "I've already called the police, so you better leave." The clerk's voice was firm, with an air of authority. The man glanced at the clerk, then at me, and suddenly turned and quickly disappeared into the shadows at the street corner. I stood there in shock, unable to fully grasp what had just happened. The clerk waited until the man was out of sight before sighing in relief and lowering the flashlight. "Are you all right?" he asked as he approached me, his voice steady. I nodded, trying to appear calm. "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "Don't go out alone so late, especially around this neighborhood. It's not too safe recently," the clerk cautioned. He seemed calm, but his eyes held a look of seasoned caution. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time after returning to my apartment. A few days later, I found out that there had been several incidents in the area where women were followed late at night, fortunately without any serious harm. I felt grateful for my luck that night. Since then, I have avoided going to the convenience store alone late at night. The image of that clerk and his firm voice remain vividly in my memory. Every time I recall that night, I feel fortunate to have had a silent guardian of the night watching over me. I am a night shift nurse, and due to my job, I often return home late at night. The hospital is not far from my apartment, and it takes about 15 minutes by bike. Since I'm busy during the day, I sometimes stop by a nearby 24-hour convenience store on my way home to grab some simple food and daily essentials. This convenience store has been open for a long time, and I stop there almost every time after my night shift. One night, after finishing a long shift, I went to the convenience store as usual. The wind was a bit strong that night, and the street was eerily quiet, with the streetlights flickering from time to time, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. I parked my bike and opened the convenience store's glass door, the chimes softly ringing as I entered. Behind the counter was a clerk, a middle-aged man I didn't recognize. I knew most of the clerks working at this time of night, but he was a new face. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, making his facial features hard to see. I gave a brief nod and headed to the snacks aisle, thinking he might be a new night shift clerk. Not giving it much thought, I picked a few items and placed them in my basket, preparing to check out. As I set my basket on the counter, the clerk looked up and gave me an unnatural smile. His voice was slightly raspy. "Out this late? Not afraid?" His tone was somewhat casual, but it made me tense up a little. "Just grabbing some things on my way home from work," I responded nonchalantly, not wanting to continue the conversation. The clerk didn't say anything further, and went back to ringing up my items, but his eyes kept flicking over to me. After I paid, I was ready to leave with my shopping bag. At that moment, the store's broadcast system suddenly came to life, and after some static, an urgent voice came through. "This is the security department. There's an emergency. Please call the police immediately." My heart instantly tightened. I looked up at the clerk, and his face turned rigid. "It's just a malfunction," he chuckled softly. "Nothing to worry about." But his smile seemed forced and unnatural. I quickly realized something was wrong. My mind raced with thoughts about what to do next, but outwardly, I tried to remain calm. I murmured a quick "thanks" and headed towards the door as if nothing had happened. I had only taken 2 steps when I heard him call out behind me, "Wait, you dropped something." My heart started pounding heavily. I was sure I hadn't dropped anything, but I couldn't afford to show panic. I turned around to see him slowly approaching me with a receipt in his hand. "You forgot this," he said, holding up the receipt, which trembled slightly in the store's dim lighting. Reluctantly, I walked back to take it, trying to keep my composure. As my hand touched the receipt, I felt his fingers, cold as ice. "Thank you," I forced a smile, then quickly turned and walked out of the store. As soon as I stepped outside, I picked up my pace, almost breaking into a run towards my bike. I was certain now that something was seriously wrong. As I got on my bike, I heard the store's chime ring again, and I knew he was following me out. I didn't dare look back and pedaled as fast as I could, heading down the small road leading to my apartment. My legs moved faster and faster, and my heart felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. Even without turning around, I could sense that he wasn't far behind. I reached my apartment building and quickly locked my bike before rushing inside. My fingers were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, but I managed to open the door and lock it behind me. I peered through the peephole and saw the clerk standing outside, looking around, his expression full of suspicion. I let out a shaky breath, but my heart was still racing. To make sure I wasn't imagining things, I called the police and briefly described what had happened. When the police arrived, I gave them a description of the clerk and what he had done. A few days later, the police informed me that the convenience store clerk that night was actually an imposter. The real night shift clerk had been attacked by this man and locked in the back storeroom. The imposter had put on the uniform to pose as an employee, possibly waiting for a suitable target, and I had been the only customer at that time. The police told me that if it hadn't been for the accidental security broadcast warning, I might not have escaped. The thought sent chills down my spine. Since then, I've never gone to a convenience store alone late at night.